We'll be talking about leadership inspired by nature, or leading in an era of sustainability. What we'll cover in the next hour or so is frame why natural leadership is needed by companies now and into the future. We'll explain why the concept of ecological thinking for radical transformation is so important. We'll discuss what we can learn from leadership models found in nature and which models work best in different situations. We'll talk about how leaders can use nature's principles to create a business inspired by nature. And then we'll provide a few activities that you can apply to your leadership work to help your organization become a business inspired by nature. I want to warn you that I just got done teaching a 10-week course in what we call creative leadership as part of a master's program. And so I'm going to try and cram 90 hours of teaching and work into this 1-hour session. So I'm going to try and cover a lot of information quite quickly before we get to the end. Okay, so why natural leadership? Why do we need natural leadership, or what we're calling leadership inspired by nature? Well, if you're listening to this talk today, I think you probably intuit the answer to this question. As all of you know, and many of you have probably spoken about or written about yourself, this is all we have to work with. It's one Earth. All of us, all of the humans, and all of the rest of the organisms in nature have to learn to survive and thrive within the constraints of the Earth, or we'll go extinct. It's really that simple, and the constraints of Earth are also pretty well known. All of the other species in nature, with very small brains or even no brains at all, have created an immeasurable diversity of successful systems that are incredibly efficient and elegant, and that have survived for almost 4 billion years. Humans, on the other hand, with our very large brains, our ability to think upper-level thoughts, our cleverness, our machines and our factories, our computers and our communication systems, our plans and our programs, have come up with some very clever inventions and business models and economic systems and governments and other organizations, but we are proving ourselves to be unsustainable. For example, I'm guessing most of you have heard of peak oil, but I am shocked by how many people have not. And I'm even more shocked that the great majority of our leaders have no plans at all to deal with peak oil or with radical price spikes or extended flow stoppages. And keep in mind that our food systems are completely dependent on oil too. So whatever happens to oil happens to our food systems. And of course, peak oil isn't the only resource limit that we're approaching. Things like peak phosphorus, if you haven't heard of that, go look it up. Again, it's completely tied to our food systems. Worse than that, conventional leadership models are actually unable to handle radical, volatile, and unpredictable change. In addition to volatility and disturbances caused by resource limitations, there are positive yet equally radical transformations caused by rapidly emerging technologies. Mobile phones, laptops, digital cameras, the web, email, Google, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, you guys know the list. These technologies have given people, incredible capacity for power that has only just begun to be released. We're seeing a shift from corporate to consumer, from broadcast to broadband, from network to network. Again, conventional leadership models are largely incapable of responding to these sorts of transformations and the impact, both positive and negative, that they have on our society, on our communities, on the people and organizations that they lead. That's because conventional leadership and conventional organizational structures were born in older time, when resources appeared to be abundant, when we cared less about human rights. Technologies were simpler and communications were controllable. Now, conventional leadership leaders strive to make their organizations independent, competitive, controlled, stable, protected, maximizing or minimizing, and focused on return on investment. Now, seeking to achieve these characteristics has served leaders well, quite well, over the past 50, 100 years, since the beginning of time, I suppose. but we all know that they have done a great disservice to the environment and to human rights. They've also done a great disservice to us, the workforce. The demoralizing, dehumanizing, soul-sucking culture of conventional business is so painfully familiar that we find great solace in shows like The Office and cartoons like Gilbert. No one deserves this kind of work life. We've been led to believe that our leaders have created great pillars of industry, but in reality, they've created castles made of sand. Our current conventional leaders and leadership models are no longer sustainable. The decade that we have now entered, 2010 to 2020, has been dubbed the decade of fear, the decade of volatility, the decade of transparency, the decade of creative destruction, and the decade of transformation. Whatever it's called, the message is clear. Change is happening, it's volatile, it will be transformative, and conventional leadership models are unfit to handle it, unfit to lead into an era of sustainability. What I believe we need now and into an era of sustainability is what we're calling natural leadership, or leadership inspired by nature. We all know that nature itself is sustainable. Nature arguably defines sustainability. So if we want to drive sustainability, be sustainable, lead ourselves and our organizations into an era of sustainability, we must realign ourselves with nature, rejoin the positive, virtuous cycles of nature. We must let go of the ways of the past, let go of conventional assumptions, let go of conventional business and leadership models, and become leaders inspired by nature. Natural leaders recognize, embrace, and leverage resource limitations, emerging technologies, rapid change, and volatility. Natural leaders are driven by ecological thinking and learn from successful leadership models found in nature. They're grounded in nature's principles and even use tools that, too, can be learned from nature. Okay, now let's move on to ecological thinking for radical transformation. If any of you looked up BCI on our website, you'll see that ecological thinking for radical transformation is our byline. And based on what you've talked about so far, you might be getting a sense of what we mean by that. Okay, we're looking at a chart here. You might look at the bottom axis as understanding or understanding of sustainability, say, and the vertical axis as performance. And we've already said that radical change, both good and bad, has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen on numerous fronts into the foreseeable future, whether it's resource limitations, rapidly emerging disruptive technologies, or climate change, political upheaval, economic instability. We cannot deal with myriad radical changes by making myriad incremental changes to conventional approaches. It's just not enough. To deal with radical changes we're facing and with the radical changes that we need to achieve in an era of sustainability, we need nothing less than radical transformation. Most leaders don't get this, and conventional leadership models, as we've said already, simply do not allow it. So that's what we mean by radical transformation. But what about the ecological thinking part? We've all heard of systems thinking, right? And we all know that somehow we're supposed to be applying systems thinking to everything that we do. But no matter how smart you are, and I'm sure you are smart, most of us have a really hard time getting our heads around systems, especially when we're supposed to be thinking about dynamic systems and systems of systems. It all seems quite complicated. It seems like a big mathematical problem. Well, the conventional approach, the approach taken by conventional leaders, is to pretend that our systems are limited, static or steady state, and controllable. And this actually can be very effective, and it has been very effective when communication technologies were limited, when things happened more slowly and more predictably, when things weren't so interconnected, and when many resources appeared to be abundant. A typical example is supply chains that, for example, here run all the way from the source of raw materials to, say, manufacturing, transportation, sales, and finally to the consumer. In this linear chain model, the only interaction, the only influence the consumer has on the system is at that last link, at the point of sale. And actually, we should have more links than that go onto the disposal end, but we're not dealing with that one here today. If you apply systems thinking, that supply chain will then turn into a value-creating dynamic network where all participants are interconnected and can share information really back and forth among all the different connection points. This system allows the sharing of ideas, of co-creativity, adaptability, and resilience, and the new radical thinking that we're talking about. And we're beginning to see this where companies are appealing directly to consumers for new ideas and solutions and things like open source design. So how do we get our heads around systems thinking? Well, luckily, we can find help in our own backyard because nature is composed of systems, dynamic systems, systems of systems at every scale and time and space. That is what ecosystems are made of and how they work. If you observe and understand how and why ecosystems work in nature, you can apply what you learn to your organization to create sustainable, dynamic, resilient, adaptable systems that work. And this is actually easier than you think because you as an organism and we humans as a species are part of nature. We've evolved to be part of numerous systems in nature. And evolution has allowed us to live as active participants in numerous complex networks of ecosystems in nature. So ecological thinking is really hardwired into our DNA. You already get it. You simply need to remember. Okay, so now let's talk about leadership models found in nature. Our assumptions and our language around leadership is usually associated with the military and sports, but it's also full of references to nature, although sometimes those references aren't correct or complete. For example, we've all heard of or used expressions like pecking order, dog eat dog, leader of the pack, or king of the jungle. This sort of language implies that nature is dominated by a top-down leadership style based on competition, constantly striving to increase your ranking within the group at the expense of others, and always fighting for the lead position. But if you think about it, fighting is expensive and generally leads to losers as well as winners. Successful species cannot afford to waste limited energy and resources constantly looking for a fight, and especially constantly generating losers within their own group. Our top-down leadership models certainly do exist in nature, and we'll talk about those in a moment, but there are a range of other models out there too. And even more interesting is that within a given group, you can find many different leadership models, either all at the same time or over time, adapting to each situation at hand. So let's look at some other leadership models that can be found in nature. We'll cover 4 of them today, and those are hierarchies, hierarchies, swarms, and one that I've come up with called roots and shoots. Okay, the first one we'll look at is hierarchies. This is the top-down leadership model that most of us are familiar with and what most of our organizations follow. It's also the one that you probably are most familiar with in nature. In hierarchies, there's always one dominant leader that everyone is supposed to follow. There's also a top-down leadership structure that permeates down to the rest of the group. In hierarchies in nature, leadership is constantly tested and reinforced to be sure that the most appropriate or fit member is leading and that the others follow that leader. In wolf packs, for example, there's a constant interaction among the members of a pack that helps maintain the optimal leadership sequence at all times for the benefit of the group, whatever the situation. If the current leader becomes unfit for purpose, injured or something, it will be rapidly revealed and he will be replaced by a more appropriate leader. However, what appears to be violent behavior or fighting among the group is often theatrical. You'll see teeth that are bared but don't actually fight. Submissive poses are assumed, not forced. So when does hierarchical leadership work in nature? It works when groups must act decisively and rapidly as a coordinated group in situations where not all members can have full and timely access to information, and when sticking to preset plans is not possible. Imagine wolves hunting in a pack, as an example. But even in groups like wolf packs that appear to operate as hierarchies, they don't function that way all the time. When top-down leadership is not needed, For example, when they're not hunting, the pack or members of the pack adopt other leadership models that are more appropriate for given conditions or situations. So when does hierarchical leadership work best in human systems? Well, the three classic examples that we're all familiar with are the military, the emergency response, and sports teams. And that's why so much leadership language comes from these sorts of situations, conventional leadership, I should say. In each case, action has to be taken rapidly and decisively in response to rapidly changing and unpredictable conditions where not all members of the group have full or timely access to information, yet they need to act as a coordinated group. You can see how that plays out in these examples, military, emergencies, and sports teams. Top-down hierarchies also have the capacity to create rapid change throughout an organization. For example, when the leader at the top wants something to happen, he or she may have the power to make it happen relatively quickly. So why aren't hierarchies appropriate in all situations? Well, hierarchies don't leverage or optimize the full capacity, the richness, the uniqueness of each individual in the organization. Hierarchies work by controlling flows of information and resources, which work for certain things, but also inhibits cross-pollination. It flows responsivity, particularly at the local level. And hierarchies also tend to stifle new ideas, stifle creativity and innovative thinking that could emerge from a diversity of individuals interacting within the organization. Okay, so the next one we're going to be talking about are hierarchies. We've all seen birds like these geese here flying in the V formation. Well, that's an example of hierarchy. Clearly there is a leader, that's the goose out front. But in this case, the geese take turns being the leader. So if you get a chance to see this V formation in action, watch how it's not that someone else dominates and takes over. It's just that lead goose knows when it's not fit to be a leader anymore, and it will just fall back into place. And I'll keep doing that over and over again. It's really interesting to actually take a look at this. So in a hierarchy, there's always one leader, but no one individual is capable of effectively leading all the time. So different members of the group take turns being the leader, but an appropriate leader is leading at all times under the given circumstance. In the D formation, the one out front is doing more work, having to do more effort. So of course the leader will eventually need a rest. But also during long migrations, it turns out no one goose knows the whole journey. So when the lead goose no longer knows the way, it'll drop back and let another goose that does know the way take over. So again, the idea is at any given time, the goose with the needed knowledge and strength is in the leadership position. And no one goose has all the needed knowledge and strength to lead the entire journey. One thing to note about hierarchies is that this is not about fairness or equality or giving everyone a chance. With geese, for example, it's been discovered that only a subset of the flock ever take turns being the leader. Some geese are never the leaders. So what hierarchy is applicable in our organization? Well, you all work on projects, I assume, and you may recognize that projects go through many different stages, such as, like in a design project, it might go through conceptualization, ideation, design, implementation, marketing, etc. And that no one person has sufficient breadth and depth of skill to optimally lead each and every step in the process. Yet among your team, you're likely to have individuals that are ideal to lead each part. Some may be suited to lead more than one part, while others may not be suited to lead any of the parts. So hierarchies work well when different leadership skills and styles are needed at different times, either within the project or perhaps different places within an organization. Note that you could have hierarchies within hierarchies. So in a project, for example, one person might be leading or overseeing the whole project or the whole company, while allowing different individuals to lead different parts of the project or different parts of the organization. So you can reflect on when this sort of leadership model might be appropriate for projects you're working on or organizations that you're leading. Here we see different examples of swarms. We've got a cluster of ladybugs, which are also in migration, bees in a hive. We've got fish here, schools of fish. So these are all examples of organizations and structures organizations in nature that have no leader at all. Now, some people think in a beehive that the queen is the leader, but actually she doesn't have a leadership role. She does have the role of making all the babies, though. Now, in this organizational structure, it works because it's full of feedback loops which allow each individual and the group as a whole to be agile and responsive, seamlessly functioning as a collective whole. Some of these groups work so well together that they're called superorganisms, meaning the collective intelligence of the entire swarm or hive make it function as if it's a single organism. To make this work, each individual is highly aware of its surroundings and constantly sending, receiving, and responding appropriately to information with those around them. This leadership structure works when everyone has the very same clear goals and when everyone always follows a few set of simple rules that typically take the form of if this, then that. Swarms can work in human systems too, and we actually probably experience that today. One example is traffic. So swarms can work in human systems when we can trust or assume that everyone will always follow the same set of rules. Now, traffic works because we all agree to follow the same rules, and that enables us to operate very large machines at relatively high speeds within feet or even inches of one another, and generally assume that we're going to get to where we want to go safely, all with no leader. They also work when it doesn't matter exactly how something gets from point A to point B, as long as we trust that it will get to B when, where, and with the characteristics needed. In our project example, we talked about having hierarchies within hierarchies, where you can also have swarms within that system, where individuals or subsets of groups can be sent off without a leader to complete a specific project task on their own, in their own way that suits them best. So swarms work well when there's a strong, clear, common goal, when all individuals are naturally inclined to follow the non-negotiable rules, and when how something gets done is not important as that and when it gets done. Conversely, swarms don't work when these conditions are not present. For example, in the military emergency response and sports teams examples that we talked about earlier. Swarms can also be really good for learning about and responding to changes in the environment because they can allow for free flow of communication, information, and resources. They allow for faster learning and responsivity. So it's really good if you know you've got a lot of rapid change or local change in the environment or context within which you're working. They also allow for creative, innovative thinking by individuals and groups, optimizing the uniqueness of individuals within the framework of the group. Swarms also have the benefit that they don't need the infrastructure that supports leaders, so you get an extra benefit there too. One really beautiful example of how like a superorganism can work is this video that you can look at the Sustainability Learning Center website to get the link. It's down here if you can read it. It's a YouTube video of swallows in a formation they call murmuration. It's when hundreds or thousands of birds fly in this gorgeous choreography. So you go from what would seem like chaos, but it turns into choreography, all without a leader. And I really encourage you to watch that. It's just a beautifully chilling example of swarm functioning. Okay, so the last leadership model I want to talk about in nature is one that you don't normally think of as leadership, but I think it's actually quite relevant to your work as leaders in sustainability. It's what I'm calling the roots and shoots model, although it covers things besides roots and shoots. So the first example I want to give you is on the right here is lichen. Here you can see lichen growing in a seemingly inhospitable place. It's on a bare vertical rock where it's very cold, that right there is snow. Now here, this lichen represents the leader of the entire ecosystem, creating something out of apparently nothing, creating conditions that will allow other life to follow. Lichen can do this because it's got this absolutely complete interconnected synergy between fungi and algae. together making it possible to live where other organisms can't. And in fact, where either fungi or algae can't live alone either. As sustainability leaders, sometimes you have to work between a metaphorical rock and a hard place, don't you? In conditions that are not hospitable to your sustainable ideas, where you have to create something sustainable out of nothing, where there's no sustainability there at all, and create conditions that allow the era of sustainability to follow your work and then flourish. So you can reflect on what you can learn from the synergy of lichens when you're out there leading your cause, leading sustainability efforts where none yet exist. On the left, you see a coconut seed sprouting. Like lichen, seeds can also be leaders, leading the life of a new plant, perhaps leading the establishment of its species or even plant life in general in a new location. In most cases, the seed will stay dormant for as long as necessary and is equipped with sensors that signal it to sprout only when and where conditions are hospitable. And from the seed emerge its first fruits and shoots, the leaders of that particular plant. So how is the seed able to do this? Well, it uses a combination of strategies. For one, it carries resources within itself so it can be self-sufficient until the roots and shoots can establish and start bringing in resources from the outside world. It also has some sort of a protective shell that only opens when conditions are right for germination. As sustainability leaders, embedded in your hearts and minds, you have the seeds of how things could be, how they should be. Your ideas about sustainability need to sprout and take root, sometimes where there's no support or no similar ideas exist. So think about what you can learn from a strategy of seeds and roots and shoots about being a sustainability leader and forwarding your sustainability project. And we've already mentioned this a couple of times already, but I just want to remind you that you could have combinations of all these different leadership models, the hierarchy, the swarms and roots and shoots. You can be dynamic, have dynamic combinations, meaning you can have more than one at the same time, and they can change over time. And that's exactly what you see in nature too. Okay, now I want to move on to talking about nature's principles. As we've been talking about natural leadership and leadership models in nature, you've been hearing some of the same words over and over again. That's because leadership inspired by nature is grounded in what we call nature's principles. If any of you are familiar with biomimicry for design, you may have learned about life's principles. Well, BCI has adapted life's principles to be more appropriate and more applicable, more usable for leadership and organizations. And we've renamed them nature's principles to be more in keeping with our inspired by nature foundation. And here's what they look like. There's just 6 of these principles, and like nature itself, all of them are interdependent and interconnected. So when you're talking about one, you're really also talking about the other. And we're not going to go into depth today, but I'll just briefly go through them. So being resilient, as some of you may know, means being able to recover from a disturbance. A business inspired by nature leverages disturbance as an opportunity rather than trying to predict and then protect against change. Optimizing is there to be really in contrast to the conventional minimizing or maximizing. And, for example, it means being formed to function. Being adaptive means constantly sensing and responding to the world around you, being flexible and continually moving towards positive outcomes. We've already talked about being systems-based, which includes integrating synergies into everything you do. Being values-based is knowing what is truly important to you as a human, as part of nature, as part of your business, and always acting in accordance with those values. Life supporting is one that you already know. It means working as an active and beneficial part of the cycles of nature. And in the word of sustainability, you know all about that. So these are nature's principles, but what does it look like actually to be a leader inspired by nature as opposed to the conventional leader that we were talking about earlier? Well, a leader inspired by nature seeks synergy rather than independence. A leader inspired by nature fosters collaboration rather than strictly competition. A leader inspired by nature leverages collective intelligence rather than forcing top-down decisions. A leader inspired by nature embraces diversity and adaptability rather than trying to protect against change. A leader inspired by nature learns the benefits of being open source rather than closed source. A leader inspired by nature optimizes across the many and across the system rather than focusing on maximizing for the few. A leader inspired by nature seeks return on engagement rather than return on investment. A leader inspired by nature thinks and works in dynamic systems rather than in static linear chains. A leader inspired by nature creates organizations that fit form to function rather than expecting people to function within a given preset, rigid form. A leader inspired by nature considers the very long term while addressing the very short term. A leader inspired by nature favors emergence over sticking to preset plans. And a leader inspired by nature seeks to be effective, not just efficient. Our old leadership and business models are no longer working. We know that. As leaders in a sustainable era, leaders inspired by nature, we will need to foster radical new thinking, creativity and co-creativity and cross-pollination, responsivity and adaptability, and a sense of greater purpose and humanity and joy in work. Now, most of you already have the knowledge, understanding, and passion to drive sustainability forward. But when it comes to implementation, I'm guessing you run into one blockade after another working with what are conventional businesses. Is that right? Now, as all of you know, leading sustainability efforts is a big task no matter what. I don't need to tell you that. However, it can be greatly facilitated by introducing and practicing some new skills, what I'm calling activities inspired by nature. So today, I'm just going to describe a few activities that you can try out right away. And what I would suggest is that you first give them a try with open-minded, eager, curious people like yourselves before you give them a go with more conventional and more challenging groups and situations. And I also just suggest you try them out with low, unimportant or simple examples as opposed to really things that people find really serious. Okay? All right. So the four I'm going to talk to you about today are pretty simple. One is simply going outside. And we're going to talk about going outside yourself for observation and reflection, and then taking a group outside to inspire discussion. The next one is bringing nature into your next meeting. And we'll talk about yes and, which comes from the world of applied improvisational theater. And then finally, we're going to talk about some forms of inquiry. Okay, go outside. Now, we're talking about being a leader inspired by nature. And one of the best things you can do is to inspire yourself with nature. Is simply go outside. That alone is a good thing, but what we've got something a little bit more active here for you to do. And this is based on enhancing your personal observation and reflection. But if any of you have read other books or heard other talks on leadership, they always talk about how important reflection is to leadership, but it's something that many of us don't ever take the time to do. And this activity is all about that. And it takes about 30 minutes. And what you do is you go outside, and you want to find a nice quiet spot where you won't be disturbed. And what you do is you sit down, you take about 10 minutes sitting with your eyes closed and your mind open. Okay, you just sit there for 10 minutes. And you might want to bring a watch with you with a timer on it, because I tell you, after about 30 seconds, you're going to feel like it's been 10 minutes, but it won't have been. And when your mind is racing and when ideas pop into your head, that's totally fine. Just kind of imagine a little box at your side, and you put that thought in that box, let it run through. You're not trying to think about anything, you're not trying to notice anything in particular, but just try and be there for a full 10 minutes. 10 minutes, you can open your eyes, and now you can start to observe. And again, you're not looking for anything in particular, just observe the world around you. Use all your senses, feel what it feels like to sit, and feel your breathing. You can watch the leaves blowing, you can watch ants scurrying around, whatever happens to be in the space around you, just observe. And in the last 10 minutes, you can use to reflect. You can reflect on what you're observing. You can reflect on a challenge that you're dealing with. You can reflect on an idea. You can reflect on leadership. You can reflect on nature's principles. So that's your time for reflection. This activity is really, really simple, and you can actually do more directed forms of this to have, with more purpose. But just this alone is fantastic. We've done these week-long immersion courses in places like Veracruz, Mexico, and Costa Rica, and some people have come away from that thinking that this is one of the best activities that they do. So taking this time to go out in nature and reflect. So this is sort of a gift you can give yourself just to become a better leader, as well as a leader inspired by nature. Okay, the next one is taking a whole group outside. Now this is really an interesting thing to do, whether it's in nature or not. So what you do, you take your group, and let's say you're having a meeting, and what you do here is you break the group into pairs, and each pair takes on a topic or a challenge. Everyone can take the same topic, or they can have subtopics for the bigger thing you're dealing with. And you send each pair for a walk outside for 10, 15, 30 minutes, depending how much time you have. Ideally, it's a natural area, but if you're in an urban environment, that's okay too. Just the act of going outside and walking is fantastic. The interpersonal relationships that you have while you're walking shoulder to shoulder outside, where you're using your body, your blood is flowing, you feel some fresh air, well, it just itself inspire a completely different dynamic, completely different conversation, which will then spawn all kinds of new creativity. So just walking out in pairs is great. It's also great to add observing nature. So when you're out in nature, even if it's just a maple tree coming up out of the sidewalk, look at the tree, look at the leaves, and just notice what's there. And again, that will send off different signals in your brain, which then sparks you to think more creatively, more dynamically. Absolutely more inspired discussions will be generated from this. If you can go to a natural area or in a greenhouse, this is even more fantastic. If you want to go even a little further with this, you can take your topic and try asking, how does nature address this topic? It could be you're coming up with a new marketing plan, a new communication strategy. It could be a new vacation policy. You say, well, how does the maple tree take a vacation? And at first that seems really silly, but actually you start to think about, well, what do we mean by a vacation? Why do we even take a vacation? And what is that, what's the parallel in nature? And again, it's approaching the topic in an entirely different way, and that will spawn inspired, new thinking, new conversations, new ideas. After you go out 15 or 30 minutes, and it can be quite challenging to get people to come back indoors, but you come back and share ideas and examples. And I guarantee you, just even a 10-minute walk outside will have so many new ideas than you would have had you just sat around the table and taking the conventional approach. An example of how this has worked in practice is some interface exploring. Some of you may have heard of them if you've heard about biomimicry, because they've become sort of a poster child for biomimicry. A guy named Ray Anderson, who just recently passed away actually, he became so inspired by biomimicry because one day he was realizing how environmentally damaging carpets were, and he had grandchildren, and he was just really stressing about what to do about it, and he discovered biomimicry and sent a group of his carpet designers out for a walk in nature. And they simply asked the question, how does nature make a floor covering? And by watching, in this example, the wind was blowing, and the wind shuffled the leaves around, the leaves blew up and landed again in a different spot than they were. And they noticed that the overall effect, or the visual effect of the leaves on the floor was the same as before the leaves were disturbed, and yet the leaves were all in a different place. And so many ideas emerged from this simple question, this simple walk in the woods. One thing was we should make tiles, not rolls of carpet, because what that allows us to do is take one out and that might be damaged and put one back without removing the entire carpet to replace this one damaged part. They also read if you could take a tile, pick it up and put it back in a different direction, that would mean you could put any carpet from any lot with the same sort of dye lot into any floor anywhere, and it would still work. You don't have to match up exactly what was there. And you can see that here, that random pattern they have. So it's completely non-directional. It's unique and it's beautiful, and it's also easier on your eyes. So they went on then to ask more and more questions, and now they're recycling their carpet. They're doing all kinds of fantastic things. All started by going for a walk out in the woods. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, next activity, is bringing nature to your meeting. Now, it's not always convenient to go out for a walk, whether it's your situation or your the weather, but you can also bring nature into your meeting and have some of the same effects. So what you do is you ask people who are going to attend the meeting to bring a natural item to the next meeting. For example, a pine cone, a flower. They could bring part of their lunch, like an orange, run outside and grab a piece of grass or a leaf, doesn't really matter. And then instead of going around and introducing yourself, I'm Denise from the marketing department, instead just say, well, this is my pine cone, and when I introduce my pine cone, I found my friend the pine cone in that underneath a big pine tree that you always see walking in the parking lot into the building. I've always loved pine cones, and that's why I brought it. Okay, so you do something like that. Again, instantly changes the dynamics of the meeting. And then when you get to your challenge that you're working on, you ask, what can we learn from these natural items about our challenge? What can we learn from a pine cone about communication, about vacation policy, about dealing with keeping our computers cool? Whatever it happens to be, a technical challenge, a personal challenge, organizational challenge, you can find new solutions, new ideas in nature. And so simply asking what we can learn from these natural items in the real world will spawn all kinds of new and incredible ideas and thoughts. The next one is called Yes and you may have seen this before if you followed applied improvisational theater. It's just a fantastic tool, and it's very simple, and the BCI group uses this always. What it is a tool that helps enhance co-creative collaboration, which is exactly what we need to drive these radical solutions into an era of sustainability. It helps keep a group constantly moving towards more and more positive outcomes instead of falling back into negative mode. And it's really simple. There's just one rule. Whenever someone makes a statement or suggests an idea, the response always has to take the form of yes and, or more elaborately, yes, what I like about your idea is blah, 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 and we could blah, blah, blah. So let's take an example of how this might look. Let's say, just to make it easy, we're planning your next Christmas party, right? So, and everyone agreed they want to do something really different. And they say, oh, I think we should hold our next Christmas party on a Saturday afternoon at a theme park. Well, I don't know about the groups that you work with, but the group I work with is just, I don't want to do it in the afternoon, and I hate those theme parks, blah, blah. Well, of course, that sets a bad tone. The person who made the suggestion feels embarrassed, and they sit down, and they might feel dejected or humiliated or angry, and of course, no one else wants to make a suggestion because they don't want to go through that. So, those are the kind of responses you'd expect. And how do you think the meeting would proceed? Well, we had this, kind of bad feeling in the meeting, and the outcome would likely be a conventional solution. You just do some version of what you did last year, right? Isn't that what you normally see in meetings? People bring up, a new idea. It's basic. It's knocked down. Okay, so now let's start again. We're going to take our yes and approach this time, though. And the first person, same suggestion. I think we should hold our Christmas party on Saturday afternoon at the theme park. Well, someone who finds that suggestion completely distasteful might say, well, yes, what I like about your idea is that it gets us outside and doing something fun together. And we can include families with kids. And someone else who also does not want to go for this idea says, well, yes, what I like about it is that we can all dress down and get to know people's families better. And we can always go out partying informally afterward. And someone else might say, well, yes, what I like about the idea of doing a fun thing outside is that includes kids, maybe even skating and sledding. And maybe we can all get babysitters so we can go outside and go out informally afterwards. You can see how you can take what would be an initially negative, starting point and turn it around into always moving towards positive outcomes. And you may be very far from having a Saturday afternoon at a theme park, but that person's original idea was respected and moved forward. So what you'll find is this sort of a situation will generate positive energy, it's respectful, it's fun, and you're always moving towards positive outcomes. And now, when I'm working with my colleagues, if we find ourselves disagreeing with someone, instead of saying yes, but, we'll say, well, the yes and is, and then we go from there. So it becomes just a habit of respecting what the person said and moving towards positive outcomes. Okay, the last one, I'm just putting under the heading of inquiry. And here, and there's actually many formal versions of this, but basically, the only rule here is that you ask questions. The idea is you want to encourage being curious and also being respectful. And the idea is you explore a question or idea rather than trying to answer it or solving a problem. And in this situation, you end up having breakdown in order to achieve breakthrough. So the rule here is that you always ask a question. You can use Socratic inquiry, or you may have heard of collaborative inquiry. All those things are based on asking questions. Now let's take our same example again. So the same statement, no one likes the idea, but instead of cutting it down, saying yes, but, you say, oh, well, what is it you like about holding it in the afternoon rather than the evening? And what's there to do with the theme park? Is the theme park open in the evening? Are there other things we might do in the afternoon? What other sorts of places with organized activities can we consider? So you see that we respect the core of the idea, but by asking questions, we can launch all new branches of ideas. And in fact, the person who originally suggested the theme park may not even like the idea, may be welcoming the fact that someone else is getting at what they're thinking about, but we're coming up with a better solution. So again, the one rule here is you ask questions instead of coming up with answers. Okay, so let's wrap up now. We've got leadership inspired by nature. Today we've talked about the how, why, and what of natural leadership, why radical transformation is crucial to creating an era of sustainability, and why it requires ecological thinking. We've talked about different leadership models in nature, and that we can learn from nature and when they're applicable. We talked about nature's principles as a foundation of leadership inspired by nature, what it looks like compared to conventional leadership. And finally, we just talked about some activities you can try to introduce and develop the skills needed to help make full use of your sustainability knowledge and passion. The message I want to leave you with is this. In order to achieve an era of sustainability, we need leaders to create a radical new vision, an incredibly beautiful and compelling vision of what sustainability means to us. We need leaders that are grounded in nature's principles that strive to reintegrate our organizations into the positive, virtuous cycles of nature. We need leaders that foster radically different ways of interacting, communicating, collaborating, co-creating. We need leaders that create conditions where each and every one of us can feel fully deployed with our creativity, where we're tolerant and empathetic and respectful of each other and the rest of nature. I believe we can learn to do all of these things from nature, using our own human nature to apply ecological thinking to achieve radical transformation into an era of sustainability. This is what that natural leadership is really all about. Okay, and at this point, We'd like to open up the floor for conversation and questions. I'll learn more about Leadership Inspired by Nature and about BCI. You can go to businessinspiredbynature.com, or you can email me directly at Denise@businessinspiredbynature.com. Thank you.